I'm Elliot Chodoff, and welcome to Conflict Uncovered, your go-to podcast for in-depth analysis on the complex and dynamic conflicts shaping the Middle East, Israel, and the world. Join us as we delve into the latest developments, historical contexts, and the geopolitical forces at play. We bring you the insights you need to understand the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay engaged, and uncover the truths behind the headlines. Hi and welcome. It's June 22nd, afternoon here in Israel, about 12 hours after the American airstrikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities. And I think it's time for us to look back a bit and see how we got to where we are today, a bit of the noise that's going on in the background. So let's begin. June 13th, 9 days ago, about 3 o'clock in the morning, about the same time as the American strike, Israelis were awakened by sirens that were set off essentially to put everybody on alert. I have a sneaky feeling it was, well, we're all awake watching this. Why shouldn't you all be? I'm joking. But in anticipation and not knowing what the outcome would be of the Israeli combined air and Mossad on the ground strike against Iran. We actually need to go back a bit, and I'm not going to go into a long and involved history, but to say that the war with Iran began on June 13th would kind of be like saying that World War II began on D-Day, on June 6th, 1944. It wasn't the beginning of the war. It was the beginning of a campaign, in this case, an offensive on our part, against a country that has been at war with us since 1979. And that's very often missed in the media discussion and, of course, in the superficial social media discussions. But when Khomeini came to power, he essentially declared war on Israel. It was actually a very similar state of affairs to what the Wall Street Journal referred to when Israel destroyed the Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1981. And that is that since they don't recognize our existence, we're not technically at war, because you can't be at war with a country that doesn't exist. But if Iran did recognize our existence, we would be at war. It's one of those anomalies of law and reality. In any event, when Khomeini came to power, he essentially declared war on the United States and Israel, declaring that America was the great Satan, Israel was the little Satan. He very quickly took the American embassy and held hostages. Shortly after that, his agents in Lebanon, not proxies, agents, Hezbollah, blew up the U.S. embassy twice in Beirut, and, of course, blew up the Marine barracks in Beirut, killing 241 Marines. And along the way, launching terrorist attacks via Hezbollah and others against Israeli and American targets, civilian and military. But to be clear, this has been an ongoing war against an aggressive regime, as President Trump referred to, the greatest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, which it is, or at least it was up until last week. Now it's intention more than capability. But nonetheless, the danger, the mischief maker, imperial in its thinking, and certainly a danger to the region, specifically to Israel because of its jihadist Nazi ideology, calling for the annihilation of Israel and, by the way, of the Jews, but also to the West and to the United States, to anybody who wants to scratch the surface with a fingernail. So on June 13th, Israel launched an offensive to finally clear this threat from Israel's boards. Will it be permanent? We'll see. Very few things in life are permanent, certainly in history. But we also need to understand that to get to June 13th, here again we have to go back a bit to the decades of watching Iran develop its nuclear capability, its ballistic missile capability, its proxies and agents capabilities around the region, all of which were focused on that day when they would believe that they could launch the final, decisive, and fatal attack against Israel. Paradoxically, uh, October 7th, 2023, and Hamas's savage attack on Israel marked the beginning of the end of the Iranian plan. Now, they didn't see it that way, and Yahya Sinwar wanted a regional war as a result. He got it, but be careful what you wish for, because he didn't get it in the way that he wanted. And in the course of the year plus, nearly 2 years at this point, since October 7th, uh, the Israeli military, having shaken off the philosophies and poor strategies that it had followed over the previous decades, finally took off the gloves and said enough is enough, having very little choice. It was one of those Pearl Harbor type wake ups, and went to work against Israel's enemies. First and foremost, Hamas. Hamas has not been eliminated, but it has certainly been defeated on the level that it doesn't pose an immediate threat to Israel. I don't want to go into the Gaza war at the moment, other than to say that um, if we quit now and leave them to their own devices, we will be facing it once again number of years down the road, 3, 5, 7, whatever it would be. But at the moment, Hamas does not present a military threat or even a serious violent threat to Israel, the country. It can certainly launch terrorist attacks and kill people. I don't want to belittle any of that, but not a strategic threat. Hezbollah, which was always considered to be the great Iranian retaliatory threat, is also out of the picture. And one of the reasons that uh, Iran armed and prepared and trained and financed Hezbollah at the level that it was up until a year ago was, in addition to Plan A, which is to be able to use them on that great fateful day when they were going to destroy Israel, but also as a retaliatory threat, keeping in mind for Israel that if it struck Iran, it would be facing not only Iranian retaliation, but also massive rocket attacks coming out of Lebanon to the tune of 250,000 rockets, maybe 300,000, the number isn't clear, plus a ground offensive on a scale much greater than what we faced on October 7th from the Nukhba forces of Hamas, but the Redwan forces, the assault force of Hezbollah, certainly capable of coming into northern Israel and doing a great deal of damage. And of course, if Israel was at that moment faced with a hot multi-front war, they would have been able to do a great deal of damage. Of course, over the past year plus, Israel started by degrading Hezbollah's capabilities, and then ultimately, some 8 months ago, destroying its capabilities. Once again, not destroying the organization, but taking out its leadership across the boards, destroying a good deal of its rocket capabilities, its launch capabilities, etc., its organizational capabilities, and ending with an agreement, including a ceasefire, that calls for Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah, which it is not doing, although it's doing some work in the south in terms of destroying Hezbollah infrastructure. But at the same time, Israel, and properly so, is taking a zero tolerance approach to Hezbollah in its violations of the agreement. So even this week, with everything going on in Iran, Hezbollah rocket launchers that had been set up in the south of Lebanon aiming at Israel were taken out in Israeli airstrikes. Hezbollah operatives and commanders that are moving back into the south have been taken out. The shift of Hezbollah, partial shift, has been to drones. We've taken out their manufacturing and storage operations. Not 100%, but we've put Hezbollah in a position where its leader, Naim Qassem, doesn't really want to get involved in another war with Israel right As a result of that operation, the earlier one, taking Hezbollah down, uh, that paved the way for the fall of the Assad regime and opened up the corridor from northern Israel through Syria and Iraq and into Iran, something that didn't exist a year ago. And in the two retaliatory strikes that Israel launched against Iran after its missile strikes over the past year, a good deal of the Iranian air defense system was eliminated. So this brings us all to June 13th, Israel in a position to strike handily without worrying about retaliation beyond Iran's capabilities. Now, the sirens on the morning of June 13th, the middle of the night, were an indication of something that we often dismiss with uh, the hindsight 2020 view of the world. The Israeli strikes that night were extremely successful, but you don't know that until afterwards. What if they fail? What if they're only partially successful? And what if the Iranians wake up in the morning and at 4 or 5 decide to launch not a few dozen missiles, but a few hundred missiles or 1,000 missiles? Because their launchers haven't been destroyed, because their command system is still in place, and so on and so forth. Now, none of that happened. There were retaliatory strikes, of course, because that initial attack was so successful. But Israel was also prepared for the eventuality that the success would be less than it was, down to not successful at all, leaving Israel open to heavy retaliation. Over the course of the past week, we've seen a number of things happening, some of which have been misreported, some of which have been, I think, poorly framed. I'd like to relate to them. But I want to start with kudos to the Air Force, to the intelligence services, and of course to the Mossad uh, for their operations on a level of historically brilliant. The term unprecedented doesn't seem to adequately describe what we're looking at. The Mossad so deeply infiltrating Iran that it actually was able to set up drone bases in Iran. There are some say actually drone manufacturing centers in Iran. So the drones were launched from close in, tracking the Iranian leadership that was to be taken out in real time, knowing where they were at a particular time, and successfully going after them, essentially decapitating the Iranian system, particularly the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, but also elements of the military, as well as nuclear scientists. And at the same time, the Air Force going in, initially also striking leaders and stripping Iran of what was left of its air defenses to clear the skies for further operations. Here, of course, the pilots deserve great credit and continue to deserve great credit for the operations that they're executing, and of course, intelligence for finding the targets, marking the targets. But the unsung heroes here are also the planners, the traffic controllers, and most importantly, the ground crews, those maintenance and repair mechanics who make sure that those aircraft are fit to take off and they actually do take off and come back. Uh, there have been no reports of Israeli aircraft losses. I don't know for sure that that is the case, but if there have been, they've been negligible. And uh, certainly anybody's familiar with air campaigns, knowing that many planes are often lost due to mechanical issues and mechanical failures and not simply from enemy action. Uh, Long flights of aircraft that are uh, thoroughbreds, essentially, on the edge of technology, and things go wrong. And in this case, they haven't. So, very, very high grades to the Air Force from top to bottom. The Iranians, of course, retaliated. And here I'd like to relate to two issues of it, of the retaliation. One is uh, I'm sorry to say, a tendency on the part of Israelis and uh, Israeli sympathizers, supporters, to making out as if Israel is being battered and smashed, um, suffering enormous damage and enormous casualties at the hands of the Iranians. And uh, woe is us. Look at what the Iranians are doing to us. And I want to break that down a little bit. Let me start with saying that it's clear the Iranians are striking at civilian targets. They hit Soroka Hospital in Beersheba. Uh, Incidentally, they damaged two mosques in Haifa. They are indiscriminately targeting civilian areas, and that is a war crime. Israelis have been killed, Jewish and otherwise, civilians, and these are tragic, tragic events. There have been wounded, tragic events. However, from there to woe is us, how could they do such a thing, is an escape from reality. We launched this offensive, justifiably, to strip Iran of its offensive and nuclear capabilities to threaten the existence of the state of Israel. Part of the package, and taking it into account, was the fact that the Iranians were going to retaliate, as any country would do under the circumstances. There's no reason not to be honest about this and say that the Iranian counterstrikes per se are what would be expected and what would be natural. The fact that once again, that they are striking intentionally civilian areas, civilian targets, protected targets like hospitals, and their little farce about there being a tank park under the hospital is just utter nonsense, of course. But the retaliation strikes in general are things that we expected, we should have expected, and we should be taking with the fortitude that is needed to continue this war to its conclusion. Having said that, a lot of nonsense running around social media that the Iron Dome is being overwhelmed by the Iranian missile attack, and that it shows that the Iranians have overtaken the Iron Dome and overrun the Iron Dome and overflooded the Iron Dome. And that's all very amusing, except for one thing. The Iron Dome is an anti-rocket system. It's not an anti-missile system. The Iron Dome is not being used against the Iranian missiles. Well, then how come they're getting through? Very, very simple. The systems that are being used against the Iranian missiles are the Arrow, the Patriot, the THAAD, David's Sling, the Iron Sling, excuse me, and a few others. And their projected success capability runs in the range of 90 to 95%. If you do the arithmetic, we are stopping 90 to 95% and sometimes more of the Iranian missiles coming in. In other words, those that are actually landing and causing death and destruction in Israel are within the projected success capability of the anti-missile systems that we are using. Now, keep in mind also that when we're talking about small number statistics, the success failure rate becomes very skewed. If they fire one missile, it becomes binary. 90% success. If it fails, it's 100% failure, and if it succeeds, it's 100% success. But if you look at the overall against the number of missiles fired by the Iranians, we are within the range of the success projection of the system. In addition to that, they sent hundreds of drones against Israel. One of them got through. The Air Force is doing a superb job in stopping them along the way. And here, once again, when we look at the overall attempts by the Iranians to cause death and destruction in Israel, the defensive systems, the interception systems have been working exceedingly well. As this goes on, we are also taking out their launchers, their ballistic missile launchers. As a matter of fact, this morning it was reported that some of the launchers that fired the missiles at Israel this morning were taken out afterwards. Their missile supply is dwindling because we're taking out their storage facilities, their production facilities, their fuel storage, and while once again I don't make light of the fact that Israel is under attack, I live here and I'm going into a safe room with the sirens just like everybody else. We are slowly but surely, and not even that slowly but surely, degrading their overall capability. Last but not least, last night, the United States joined the Israeli effort. B-2 bombers, cruise missiles, the bombers dropping massive penetration munitions on the Fordo nuclear facility, cruise missiles also hitting Natanz and Isfahan. The dust hasn't settled, and with all due respect to President Trump's statements, and I certainly have a lot of respect for his decision, thank you very much for joining us in this against our mutual enemy. The reports are that the targets have not been destroyed, but rather heavily damaged. And this is not surprising. I gave a briefing to a group of Air Force officers, U.S. Air Force, in the United States about a decade ago, and I told them, "You guys have the capability because you can do it persistently and consistently. Bomb, assess, and then go back and do it again until whatever target is being hit is destroyed." So we're not there yet. Uh, I haven't seen Israeli assessments yet either of the extent of damage. Damage was certainly done. It was certainly a shock to the Iranians, and the war continues. Not much to say about the bombing and cruise missile strikes. The B-2s and the cruise missiles did what B-2s and cruise missiles are meant to do. They hit the targets and they hit them well. What I would like to note is that the American and Israeli deception operation worked brilliantly. Nobody had any idea what was going on the outside, and that credit to both President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu in keeping everybody guessing and all sorts of false flags running around all over the place. But I would also like to note, and positively, the fact that there were no leaks on the American side, that the Pentagon has been, at least for this one, hermetically sealed, where in previous years, previous administrations, it leaked like a sieve, was very impressive, and once again, high grades on that. Where is it going from here? We shall see. I don't do prophecy. I posted on social media. We will now learn whether the Ayatollah is Sicilian. And the reference, those who know me know that I often refer to The Godfather. The reference here is when the consigliere Hagen comes back after his meeting with the movie producer, and the question is this man a Sicilian? And of course, the question is not whether he's ethnically Sicilian, but rather, is he willing to risk everything on a point of honor? And that's something we're going to have to see. Will they fold? Will they hold? Tonight, will they strike American targets? Will they trigger attacks not only in the region but throughout the world? Are there Hezbollah sleeper cells in Europe and the United States? Will they be activated? These are open questions. Stay tuned. We're watching. And will Iran get the message, turn around and say, okay, we need to change our direction and our policy and our behavior? Or are they going to double down and continue forward? If I had to bet, I would bet on the latter, but I wouldn't bet a lot of money on anything right now. It's way too dynamic. Will there be regime change? I'm going to leave that for a later discussion. Something we're also watching. I don't think it's happening overnight, but we've all been surprised before. Nobody predicted the Syrian collapse. Once again, wait and see. So it's been a long talk, longer than usual, but I think there was a lot that needed to be covered. So in the meantime, wherever you are, stay safe, stay engaged, and next time. Thank you for listening to Conflict Uncovered. As always, it's been another rough day in the Middle East. We hope you found this episode insightful and engaging. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share and recommend with your friends, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. For more in-depth analysis and exclusive content, join our community and follow us on social media. Stay tuned for our next episode as we continue to explore the critical issues shaping the Middle East and the world. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe.